The views expressed on the following program do not necessarily reflect the views of Money Radio staff, management, or advertisers, and do not represent an offer to buy or sell any securities. Some interviews heard on this program may be sponsored by the participants. It's time for Health Futures with Cypress Home Care Solutions, Bob Roth. This is Arizona's only show dedicated to providing you with expert advice on how to live a longer, healthier, and happier life. To learn more, call 602-264-8009. That's 602-264-8009. Now, here's your host, Bob Roth.
Good afternoon. You're listening to Health Futures, Taking Stock in You. I'm your host, Bob Roth, and it must be Friday, and indeed it is. We're coming at you live from the Scottsdale Air Park studios of Money Radio, 1510 AM, 105.3 FM, and the World Wide Web, moneyradio1510.com. If this is the first time you've tuned into our show is about how older adults can live a healthier, happier life. And how do they do that? They do that by listening here. Not to me, but these incredible guests that I get to come onto the show. And today is no different. I am pleased to have my new friend here in the studio with me, Sonnie Linebarger. She is the executive. She has an executive consulting and coaching company called Evoke Greatness, and I knew her from the healthcare field. She used to be in the hospice business, and I'm just really excited to have you here on the show. Welcome to the show, Sonnie.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's good to have you here, and you've gone through a transformation recently, and I really love the work that you're doing and the work that you did do. And I want to take this opportunity for you to kind of share with our listeners a little bit about you, because you know, when you and I were talking about this 20-year journey, I mean, you went from a CNA to chief operating officer of a very, very large hospice company. So can you indulge me and share with me and our audience a little bit about you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I never was that girl who wanted to be a nurse or to be a leader. I had originally majored in psychology, and it was like that was my path. And my mom said, hey, how about you do a backup plan, just a plan B? I'm like, no. And she said, just go get your CNA license. And I'm like, I'm not really interested. And she goes, well, I'll pay for it. I'm like, okay, sold. all of 17 or 18 years old. And so I went and got my CNA license here locally and ended up doing registry work. And if for anyone who knows what registry work is, that is really about going in when someone has not shown up for their role. And typically the setting was going to be in nursing homes. Mm-hmm. And I went into some nursing homes that were not the most delightful, but that were probably in need of the most care. And so for 8 hours that day, I would go in and I would get the caseload of patients that
Nobody wanted.
They were the hitters and the biters and the scratchers, and they were mean. And my very naive self went into that, and I thought, I could really hate this. Or I could come in and try to make 8 hours of their day a time when it's a human taking care of another human. That they're not the caseload that nobody wants, that they're not the ones that got pushed off, that, you know what, if maybe their day or their week or their month or their year is not great, the 8 hours that I'm here are going to be. And that really helped me fall in love with taking care of people.
Wow.
And from there, I did that for 10 years while working my way through nursing school, ended up becoming a registered nurse. And then how I got into hospice was I was working at Phoenix Children's Hospital, worked in the pediatric ICU, absolutely loved it.
I got chills.
And I took care of, helped with all the phenomenal team there, take care of the 2% of the population where something went wrong. And in addition to that, I then had my first baby. And he was very sick. And so I would go to work, and for 12 or 14 hours, I would take care of very sick kids. And then I would come home and I would take care of a very sick kid. And it got to be so emotionally overwhelming that I wasn't giving my best self to anybody. I was just exhausted, psychologically, mentally, emotionally. And I had a friend who said, hey, what if you came to hospice? And I said, oh, no. In nursing school, they say that's where people go to retire.
Right.
Lord have mercy. I started here locally at Hospice of Arizona.
I remember them well.
I was an RN case manager, just did the bedside care, and absolutely fell in love with it. By far, one of the most difficult jobs I've ever done. So this whole easy thing was really not the real story, but it ended up being the balance that I needed emotionally so that I could be at home and be off to take care of my family and take care of my son when I needed it. And it really let me kind of open up this part of me that helped walk people through the very final days or hours or months of their life. And as much of a gift as that is, when you're a compassionate person in that position, caring for patients and their family and their loved ones, it's almost a little bit selfish because you get so much out of it. Mm-hmm. It's such an honor to be able to do that type of work. And so that was really how I ended up getting into the hospice world, and still never had a desire to get into leadership. I just wanted to provide the care. I wanted to be that nurse who walked them through that journey. And then organically found my way. I had amazing people come alongside me and see things in me that I probably didn't see in myself, laid pavers out in front of me, and that really helped navigate the trajectory of my career.
Wow.
Yeah.
You went from hitters and biters to working with, very sick pediatric kids.
Right.
And then you went to working with older adults primarily.
Yes.
In the hospice field.
Yeah.
I mean, you talk about, going across the continuum. You
Right.
certainly did.
Right.
And I got to tell you, we're here at Cypress, and many of my guests that come on the show, we're talking about older adults. I love this side of the business.
Yes.
These folks have lived incredible lives, and we get a chance to be part of their final chapter.
Right.
And really help them through this journey called life.
Absolutely. It's a gift. It's truly a gift.
I couldn't agree with you more. So I'm very familiar with Hospice of
Yes.
Arizona, and Doreen Marley, God rest her soul.
Yes.
She was an amazing leader, and what a great company they were, and they gave birth to a lot of great individuals
Right.
that are doing amazing things throughout the country, you being one of them. How did your trajectory go from there? Because I didn't really know you then, but I knew you at your last stop.
Right.
Tell me your path.
Yeah, so I ended up, I stayed in clinical. I went into leadership, and I really stayed in that clinical lane because that was comfortable for me. I knew my clinical component being a registered nurse, and so I stayed there, and I got really, really good at that and grew into clinical leadership. And then I got really curious as I got my first big girl job that was a traveling job, and I became a road warrior. And I got really curious about the business side of things. And so how does this operations thing work in the background, finance, sales? I've always been very curious, and so I want to put all of that together and better understand how the business functions. And so I went in and I got really bold and asked about moving into operations. And actually my leader at the time said, Sonnie, I hope you know that they're going to want somebody with a lot of operations background. I'm like, that's fine, but know that I will work circles around anybody if I get this shot. And so they ended up putting me in that position, and that was kind of my first entree into operations.
Wow.
And then that led me to getting recruited for a chief operating officer position. And I was actually meeting with two companies at the time, and went all the way, flew to New York City to meet the board of one, and Salt Lake City to meet the board of the other. And really, really enjoyed and was very aligned with both teams, and ended up choosing the role where I wouldn't have to move from Arizona. Having a family, and it's like we have deep roots here, and so wanted to make sure that I would still be able to do the role and not have to uproot my family.
And it's interesting. You talked about finance and sales and learning about those, but I know you more as it relates to people.
Right.
Because people follow you. You inspire people.
Yeah.
And do you feel like that always has been a gift of yours, or is that something that has evolved over time?
I definitely think it's evolved over time. I think as I've gotten more comfortable in my own skin and comfortable in my own voice and owning the presence that I stand in, I think that has shifted and changed things, whereas I may have thought those things before or felt that way before. I probably didn't have enough boldness in me to talk about it out loud because I would be afraid that someone would think that sounded silly.
Right. So we have about another minute left in this segment. Talk to me about the transformation from leaving the chief operating officer of a hundreds of millions dollar business to doing what you're doing now, consulting and this company called Evoke Greatness.
Yeah, so I ended up making the decision post-pandemic, and that had a lot of play in it, to step out of this 20-year career that I had built and step into some really big, bold dreams that I'd been having in the background, and made the decision through a lot of self-awareness and kind of emotionally preparing myself. Anytime you leave someplace, there's still a sense of loss and still a sense of grieving around that. And so you have to emotionally process through that to be able to set you up successfully to enter in that next chapter. And so I decided I was going to, if I was going to place a bet on anybody, it was going to be on myself. And so I went ahead and pulled the trigger on transitioning out of Bristol Hospice and my corporate career overall, and taking all of the skill set and everything that I had learned over those years and built this business of Oak Greatness at the intersection of what I excel at and what I'm really passionate about.
And I know this about you. You didn't have a single coach. You had multiple mentors and mentees that you were really giving you advice and counsel. I'm sure you confided in a lot of people to make this decision.
Absolutely. You have to surround yourself with good counsel.
It took your village.
It did.
And
Indeed.
it does take a village to
That's
do
right.
the things that we do every day, day in and day out. Well, as you can hear the music, we're down one segment. So our listeners know a little bit about Sonnie, but I really want to dig into what you're doing now, because I, being a father of daughters, certainly love the work that you're doing in terms of women and getting them more into leadership positions and getting them comfortable in their own skin. So stick around. You're listening to Health Futures, Taking Stock in You. I'm your host, Bob Roth. I got Sonnie Linebarger here in the studio. We will be right back.
Now back to Health Futures, taking stock in you. If you have questions about your own or your loved one's future health care, call 602-264-8009. Now, here's your host, Cypress Home Care Solutions, Bob Roth.
Welcome back. You're listening to Health Futures, Taking Stock in You. I'm your host, Bob Roth, and if you're just tuning in, I got Sonnie Linebarger here in the studio. If you missed our first segment, go up to our website at cypresshomecare.com. Click on the media button. The radio button's right below that. You'll catch this show and about 500 more that we've been bringing to you almost for 10 years. So in that first segment, we learned a lot about Sonnie and Sonnie and her career path. And, you know, she didn't really get a chance. Maybe you can tee it off in the second segment. Are you a Phoenician? Where are you from originally?
Originally from Farmington, New Mexico.
Okay.
Yes, moved here when I was 9, so it's, basically a native.
Right.
But yeah.
Right, and we learned a lot about her career path, and now she's at this juncture where she has stepped down from corporate America, and she is an entrepreneur, and she's got this business that she's created where she's doing executive counseling and consulting and coaching, and it's called Evoke Greatness. And I've been following Sonnie for a couple years now, and you have this gift. You really do to inspire others, and you take a lot of your thoughts and feelings and you put them into words. And obviously there have been a lot of people that have followed you, and I really would love for you to just share with our listeners what propelled you to doing this.
Yeah.
Because I know a lot of soul searching probably happened. You told us in the first segment too that the pandemic, post-pandemic, I mean, all of us are looking for more life-work balance, and I'm sure that had to play a big role in it. And I will share this with you, our listeners, is Sonnie's not afraid to be vulnerable and putting herself out there and really showing others about where her chinks in her armor are and the things that she's done to work on those.
Yeah, no, I am, I share all the mistakes and all the wins and all the losses, because if you keep those secret, nobody else gets to learn the lesson from them. And if somebody else can vicariously learn through you and avoid making the mistake themselves, then that's a win, all the way around. So, but going back to the pandemic was working in healthcare. And coming into that, I had started with Bristol in early 2019, and we had casted our vision. We were looking high in the sky as to all the great things we were going to do. Built up our team, had an incredible caliber of talent around the table, and we were ready. We were ready to grow, and we were ready to provide excellent end-of-life care. And then all of a sudden, about a year in, about January of 2020, all of a sudden, started hearing a few rumblings across the country. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden come March, and there was you put the emergency brake on. And myself and most of my team traveled around the country. On any given week, we were usually on a plane more than we were in an office or at home.
Right.
And that came to a screeching halt, and that made us have to step back and say, okay, how do we get resourceful and creative enough to navigate through this and be able to protect people the way they need to be protected, be able to communicate the way we need to be communicating, and set everybody up for this. And I feel like we did a tremendous job, not without errors, because we're human and that's what happens, but we really almost created this command center that we could communicate, we could get the appropriate PPE out. And when you go through a process like that, when you lead through crisis like that in a way that you've never done before and something you've never navigated before, I really believe that it changes something in you. Mm-hmm. And so we had to get incredibly resourceful and creative around how we did that. But in that, I had been traveling for 10 years, and I had probably been on a plane more often than I was at home. And I've got boys who are 10 and 14, 11 and 14, and so most of their life they knew me on a plane.
Right.
And so when we all of a sudden hit the emergency brake and spent a lot of time at home and did things more remotely, it first of all took an adjustment to get back to everybody being in the house together,
right.
which is really interesting. And then we were starting to get on each other's nerves, and so I said, all right, hold on, guys. We have to remember, how many days, how many months, how many years did you pray that mom would be at home more? And so we need to think about, let's take advantage of this time. We don't know how long it's going to last.
Right.
And so let's spend this time intentionally. And that kind of reshifted and reset our focus. And though there was tremendous tragedy and crisis throughout the pandemic, personally, there was something about it that was a blessing in disguise. It gave me time that I hadn't had before. And when you get a taste of that and you really begin navigating in a world that is so virtual nowadays, you learn what you're capable of doing. And so with that, it started kind of giving me this thought of, what if I could do something? You know, I've always had these big ideas, but I've always been very quiet about them because I don't want, throughout my life, I've not wanted people to think they were stupid or think, who is she to do that?
Right.
And so it's like this imposter syndrome that you fight. It's that story that you tell yourself about yourself, that negative voice in your ear. Mm-hmm. And once you learn to get a handle around that and you recognize that other people's opinions are absolutely none of your business, you can actually start living in the moment and live it with boldness. And so that's what I did. August of 2021, I finally was like, all right, I'm going to pull the trigger on something here. And so I started Evoke Greatness podcast, and I was terrified. And I thought, I need to record this first episode
right.
because I just need to get it out there. And people may think it's absolutely ridiculous, and who is she? And I don't care. I'm going to do it anyway. And so I put the first one out there and took a big, deep breath. And I'm like, I'm going to do this. And I may be terrible at it for a little while. Mm-hmm. But on the 10th or 20th or 50th episode, I'm going to be a whole heck of a lot better than when I started. And I'm going to, the whole idea behind this podcast was that I share the lessons of myself and others and all that we've navigated on our way to greatness, the ups, the downs, the mistakes, the mishaps. And if I could get a collective group of people who are really successful to share those stories and be able to disperse that to a lot of people via podcast, how cool would that be? And so that really started like it was the first flip of the switch for me. And then navigating through and living in the corporate world, I really had to kind of take a step back and say, is this what I want to do? Because when you work for a company, especially a company that's private equity backed, you're running a company, you want to do a really good job of it. But at the end of the day, it's about an investment. Mm-hmm. And you have to think about that there has to be a fine balance about that. And so you're either going to be in it for the grind for 3 to 5 years before you transact on that next deal, or you aren't, right? And so I had to think about, my son is 14 years old. He's starting as freshman this year. Matter of fact, on Wednesday, he started his first day. I have 4 years. And if I do another deal where I'm 3 to 5 years of a grind, I miss high school. And that was it. That made my decision for me.
I wrote that down before you even talked about that, the fact that your kids and being a father of daughters, I mean, the ages that they're at right now are so important.
Right.
And the fact that you are now not on a plane and how that it must feel for you to be involved in their lives. Yeah. Especially high school. It's a scary place I remember being in high school. It's a scary time. And certainly having their mom available to them is so important.
Yeah,
so
there's been too many parent-teacher conferences or games where I've come screeching in the parking lot from the airport dressed in my business attire, and I'm changing in the parking lot and trying to run out to the field to catch half the game.
Right.
Whereas if I made an intentional choice to do something different, then I own my time. Mm-hmm. And that's where I'm at.
No doubt. And certainly, when I look at your podcasts, and I've listened to some of them, and for our listeners, those that want to listen to Sonnie's podcast, you want to go to Evoke Greatness, and it's out there on Apple.
It's on every podcast platform, anywhere that plays podcasts, but Apple. And if you go to my website, evokegreatness.com, there's a podcast link or a podcast page, and so you can actually click on each one of those, and it'll take you directly to the episode.
And you've put out how many?
26.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you know that old adage about rising tides lifts all boats.
That's right.
I mean, you bring a lot of content to the listeners.
Right.
And, you know, I shared this with you just before the very beginning. You know, I listened to your podcast from back in July, mid-July, July 14th. And you wrote, you did this podcast, What Does the Very Best Version of You Look Like? And it really talked about, you know, creating a 2.0 version of yourself.
Right.
And really, you know, digging deep down and really looking at yourself, not just professionally, but personally as well.
Right.
And really looking at whether or not you're doing things right.
Right.
And you're accomplishing what you're setting out to do.
Right. And are you doing something that's purpose-driven?
Right.
Do you have a why in it? Because when you don't have a why in it, that disconnects you.
Oh, totally.
And so if you can show up as your very best self, it's really kind of like a higher level of coaching, right? It's a lighter touch of coaching. So when you have that executive coaching, you're sitting down and you're really going deeper on that type of stuff of what does the very best version of you look like and how do we get there?
Right.
And so if I can even sprinkle some of that on the episodes of the podcast, then they get a touch of that.
No doubt. And certainly you dig deep into talking about everything from exercise to the fuel that you put in your body to the sleep that you get. All of those are very important. It's hard to believe it. We're at halftime here at Health Futures. We got one half down. We got a second one coming. Stick around. I got Sonnie Linebarger here in the studio. We'll be right back.
Being in control of your money provides freedom. Learn how to make it, spend it, and invest it. We're Money Radio 1510 and 105.3 FM.
Now back to Health Futures, taking stock in you. If you have questions about your own or your loved one's future health care, call 602-264-8009. Now, here's your host, Cypress Home Care Solutions, Bob Roth.
Welcome back. You're listening to Health Futures, Taking Stock in You. I'm your host, Bob Roth, and if you're just tuning in, we are in our second half here. I've got Sonnie Linebarger here in the studio. She is an executive consultant and coach. She's got an incredible company called Evoke Greatness. She's got a podcast that's out there. It is Evoke Greatness, so you can learn more about it on her website, evokegreatness.com. That's a lot of words.
That's a lot.
But in any case, in that first segment, we learned a lot about Sonnie, and we learned a lot about her background, and she talked to us about being a CNA, becoming all the way to a COO of a very, very large, hundreds of millions of dollars hospice. And she just stepped out of her comfort zone and went off on her own to do executive consulting and coaching. And she talked a lot about that. But, you know, here we are in our second half. And, you know, I want to talk a little bit about some of the challenges and lessons that you've learned, and certainly in the current environment we're dealing with. And you know, in this post-pandemic, and I probably shouldn't say post because so many people are getting COVID right now. So it's still around, but the nice thing is that we have treatments.
Right.
Where 2 years ago, it was scary. People were dying.
Right.
So we've learned a lot, but at the same time, the world has changed a lot, and we are doing so much differently today, and we're connecting differently too. And you were a travel warrior, and I would imagine that travel warrior you in these last 6 months was still traveling, but probably not as much. You probably are still able to connect with people via phone and virtually and get a lot accomplished.
Yeah.
But you know, our current environment, you know, one of the things that we're dealing with right now, and it's something that you became many, many years ago, a CNA, is, you know, we have a staffing shortage like none others.
That's right.
I mean, and don't get me wrong, it's not specific to healthcare. It crosses all industries,
Right.
But healthcare is so important, and it is something that all of us need, and we are aging at such a rapid rate. I mean, we are, you know, to think about it, Sonnie, between now and 2050, the number of people that are 85 and older is going to go from 7 to 8 million to over 21 million people.
It's incredible.
So the stress that it's going to put on our healthcare system is phenomenal.
Right.
So it's like, how do we manage through this? And I would love for you to share with our listeners.
Yeah, so there was a labor shortage, really, when you think about nursing or the clinical aspect of healthcare. There was a shortage before the pandemic.
No doubt.
And then all of a sudden, the pandemic hit and people got really scared. Healthcare workers did not want to expose themselves or their family or their friends to, being in that mode of you're actively in buildings that may have multiple patients with COVID. And so it got really scary. And so people started leaving the industry, not leaving necessarily for another industry or another role. They actually just went home. And so, I think for a period of time, there was that supplemental unemployment kind of perk that the government decided.
$600 federal dollars,
right.
And in the state of Arizona, $254.
Yeah.
So it equates to about $21 to $22 an
right.
hour. They were receiving just to stay at home.
Right.
I know that very well because
yes.
Caregivers on average were in our marketplace were making, let's call it $13 to $15
right.
an hour. So making far more to just stay at home.
And so people left and we thought, oh, okay, this will last 6 months or whatever period of time, and then they'll all come back. And so we're past that time, right? That supplemental benefit no longer exists, and not everybody came back. And so for a little while, it was the food service industry that was taking some people, offering upwards of $18, $19, $20, $21 an hour for just a walk-in person behind a counter.
Chick-fil-A, $18 an hour.
That's
I
right.
just saw the ad.
And so we thought, okay, well, it's the food service industry is where we're losing people. What it comes down to it is I really believe that there have been a lot of people who have stepped out of the stressors in hoping to seek some sort of work-life balance. And so I know a number of people who have gone off on their own, and decided, if I'm going to do this, I want to work for me. I want to be able to have this balance. I want to own my time. And so that's great for them. But the healthcare industry needs people. Mm-hmm. And so when you think about it, I've spoke on this on many panels of many conferences over the course of the last 6 months, but the staffing shortage, we're at a crisis. And to your point, it's not just in the healthcare industry, it's across the spectrum.
Exactly.
And what happened was when we shifted to a remote workplace, people could work from home if their job responsibilities deemed it such. And then they got to a place where they don't want to go back in the office. And so what that did is it created a delta between relationship, between connection, between community. And so what I've been talking about is, yes, great, recruit all you can, do all the things, use AI. Those things are all good. But there's 3 C's that I have cited over and over and over at every conference.
Is one of them culture?
Well, actually, it's communication,
okay,
connection, and community.
There you go.
And so if I am someone, so we should first think about retaining people, right? Retention. You want to keep the good people in place. And if you can keep the good people in place, you have to recruit less because you're retaining them. If you have someone who has no community, no connection, and very little communication, it is way easier for me to send my 2-week notice into you via email and never even have to see you because I have no connection, I have no relationship with you.
So true.
And so if we can restore that piece from a hospice perspective, we had meetings every week, every other week, where we all sat around the table and we talked about all of our patients and how they were doing, and you had your team surrounding you. Then you went to a remote, and so everybody's on their computer or on their phone. And those relationships started getting a divide, and then people started not really having a connection anymore. So if you have somebody who's really engaged, and you have somebody who has a connection to the people around them, it is way harder for me to walk away from those relationships and the connection if I have that to go to another job. But when you lack the connection, the communication, the community, it is by far way easier to walk out on you and go down to Business B down the street.
So true. I mean, those 3 are the most important components to creating that culture
right.
that I was talking
right.
about.
That makes up that culture.
Exactly. And I mean, the biggest challenge we have in home care is we are employing people that aren't quite CNAs. Some of them are
right.
CNAs. And you mentioned that, the federal dollars that were coming out, so many of them sat on the sidelines. one of the things that people weren't aware of was what you shared was we were having a staffing issue beforehand.
Right.
And one of the things they also weren't aware of, and this is data that I've gotten from the Paraprofessional Healthcare Institute out in New York, which tracks direct care workers, is between 20 and 26, believe it or not, this workforce, this direct care workforce, nearly 2/3 of them were going to retire out.
Right.
Because we don't have any new people coming in.
Exactly.
So to your point, this pandemic scared people off and scared a lot of people into retirement and just said, I'm done.
Right.
I'm not going to do this, but we don't have anyone coming up behind them.
Exactly. And so I think it's now is more important than ever to, culture is a word that's thrown around a lot.
Right.
And if you don't have the true building blocks, the foundation of culture, it's a bunch of garbage. I mean, let's be honest. And nobody wants to show up to a work and spend more time in an office or more time with a team that they're not engaged with, that they don't appreciate and have job satisfaction around. They'd rather be at home. But if you can create an environment where it is engaging, where they have satisfaction and connection and relationships, those people are going to want to stay there. Not only that, they're going to tell their friends about it.
Right.
They're going to tell their fellow CNAs, nurses, social workers, chaplains. They're going to say, hey, I love my job. I know you see it on social media because on my Facebook I post how great my company is. When you do that and you have employees and people who are really engaged and they share that openly, other people want to be a part of that.
No doubt. No doubt. And the one piece I know about caregivers is, pay never was number one factor.
No.
Respect was.
Yes.
Because they felt like they were given such menial tasks and weren't really respected and were told to do this, told to do that, and they had no input.
And they are the absolute backbone of our industry.
Exactly. We as entities, as Cypress Home Care Solutions, we don't exist if we don't have good workforce.
100%. And our patients don't get cared for if we don't have that.
Exactly. And then we can't continuously get referrals if we're not doing our job and doing it really well. Well, 3 segments, they go really fast. In this 4th segment, I really want to talk about this ideal that you were one of the co-founders on, and Kristen Duell was as well.
Yes.
And I really appreciate what you guys are doing, shining a light on women in healthcare and really taking more leadership roles.
Yeah.
Because I got to tell you, when I first got into home care over 20 years ago, there were more women in there in those type of positions than there are today. There are a lot more men.
Yes.
So we'll talk more when we get back. You're listening to Health Futures, Taking Stock in You. I'm Bob Roth, your host. I've got Sonnie Linebarger in the studio. We'll be right back.
Now back to Health Futures, taking stock in you. If you have questions about your own or your loved one's future health care, call 602-264-8009. Now, here's your host, Cypress Home Care Solutions, Bob Roth.
Welcome back. You're listening to Health Futures, Taking Stock in You. I'm your host, Bob Roth. We're in our 4th segment. If you're just tuning in, I've got Sonnie Linebarger here in the studio. She is an executive consultant and coach. She's got this new company called Evoke Greatness. She brings a wealth of history and experience to this new company that she's created. And if you missed the first 3 segments, go out to our website at cypresshomecare.com. Click on the media button right below it is radio show. You'll catch this show and many, many more. So we've talked a lot about different things. We've talked about Sonnie's transition from corporate world to the entrepreneurial space. We've talked about some of the lessons that we've learned, certainly through this pandemic, and she shared a lot in terms of her evolution, in terms of being a leader and starting out as a CNA and becoming a COO. So in this 4th segment, I really want to take some time and really unpack this organization that you were one of the co-founders of, and it's called Ideal for Healthcare. And basically, I want, it's where you're sharing your passion for the advancement of women in healthcare, and certainly being a father of daughters and certainly being around a lot of women in healthcare. I love the work that you're doing. I love that you've drawn a lot of attention to it. I think you guys were just at, the Texas Home Care Association, and you guys had a booth there, and you probably brought and recruited a lot more women on board. So share with us, what is Ideal for Healthcare? And I'm sure it's an acronym. So
it is.
Please share with us.
So it's the Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity Alliance for Leadership in Healthcare. And it really has a focus on catalyzing that upward mobility and greater visibility for women in healthcare. So we have women in healthcare who get to a certain level, and we want to, number one, as we just talked about, this labor crisis, right? Staffing shortage. We have women leaders leaving healthcare as well.
Right.
And so that's something that is a passion point for me, myself and Kristen Duell, we co-founded this. And we're really committed to championing the development and advancement of female leaders in the healthcare industry. And all of this stems from being in a space of healthcare, which is female dominated, and going to conferences every year and really being able to get an intimate lens on the fact that typically it's about 66% of the speakers on any panel at any conference are men. And what I know to be true is that I can look around me at almost any given time and be surrounded by expert women within the healthcare space. And so it really came to a point of frustration at a conference of saying, hey, wait a second, I'm surrounded by expert women, and yet 66% of this conference that we're at, that's the best conference of the year, that we all pay a lot of money to be a part of, stood neck and neck with the national average at 66% of those presenters were men. And so people had been frustrated by this year over year. And so it was finally like, okay, we can either keep complaining about this next year at this conference, or we can do something about it. And so Kristen and I really got busy on creating this concept around Ideal. And the sad part is you look at there's a number of factors to this, but you look at boards that don't have the gender measures that you would think that they have today, given how many women are in healthcare.
Right.
And when it gets down to executive board positions, it's actually single digit for females.
Single digit percentage?
Yes.
Wow.
And so when you think about that, so you look at pay disparity. Okay, 83 cents on the dollar is what a woman makes compared to a man, neck and neck, exact same experience. It'll take us 136 years to get to an equal pay.
Wow.
And so we thought, okay, we
can't live that long.
No. Yeah, right. We've got to make something happen. And so we exist to do just that.
Right.
And so there's a number of things that we're doing, but what we found was people wanted to be a part of this.
Right.
And so we created this nonprofit organization of Ideal, and really to serve women, to help them, come alongside of them, and offer sponsorship and mentorship, offer to create a digital directory. You know, one of the things that we heard was, well, you talk about wanting to see more women on the stage, but we don't want to put a woman on the stage just to put a woman on the stage.
No.
Okay. No, you're right. You shouldn't.
You shouldn't. If they have something to say, yes.
That's right. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so it was like, well, we don't know where to find these women. Well, so what we did is we're trying to remove all of the obstacles, all of the excuses, move those out of the way. And so we're in the process of creating a digital directory to where these women are members. We have men and women members, because ultimately at the end of the day, we have to come along together to progress in this. And so it's not an us versus them from a man and woman perspective. It is, we need like-minded people to help us move forward the momentum on this. So we're creating a digital directory, and that will contain members and their specific interests, their specific expertise. And so if I am an association or an organization and I am looking for a female speaker on the topic of hospice, then I could look and I could see Sonnie's name here. If I have someone who is not only a speaker interested in speaking about hospice, but also interested in board positions, then I can go in there and I can see, oh, hey, Sonnie has this interest in it. And so we're really trying to remove the obstacles or the barriers out of the way to really progress this movement along. And we're looking to partner with organizations and associations to say, okay, how do we come together and how do we provide you with experts and board members and people who can come along and add value to your conference and be able to have those people right there. And so in that partnership, it's looking at also getting men involved in this process. And so we have on our advisory board, we have several men that'll be a part of this, and they're really helping us move this along. But I think it's ultimately about taking a look at that inclusion and diversity. And that's not just from a man and woman perspective. You know, you think these statistics are bad for a woman, look at women of color. those statistics fall even lower.
Yes, they do.
And so we have created a diverse board to really take a look at all angles of this. And how can we all put our heads together and our organizations together and our networks together and our credentials together and move this along?
I love it. I mean, listen, Sonnie, you shared with our listeners in the first or second segment, you talked about your own self. And you didn't have a resource like this.
Right.
And you pulled yourself up by your own bootstraps and found that inner self of yours that was doubting you, that felt you weren't good enough,
Right.
you weren't, smart enough, and you were able to persevere. But how many women are just being kept down and they don't have the impetus, the encouragement, the mentorship, and
Right.
I would imagine that is what you're trying to accomplish with Ideal,
Well, and women, we are sometimes our own worst enemy.
right?
I mean, when you talk to executive women, we are battling, trying to balance, and I say this with air quotes for those who are listening, trying to balance everything, trying to always be on. And so when you're trying to juggle the kids and the executive career and, trying to
Take care of the home.
take care of the home and know that you're being paid less, that you may be passed over for promotions, that you're not getting the board seats or the speaker positions like you would like, that's where we come along. And we want to come alongside people and lift them up and provide everything they need to be able to outline where they want to go and how to get there.
Love it. Absolutely love it. I really do. I admire what you're doing, and I don't think I've officially joined Ideal, but I am definitely going to sign up.
Good.
We're about ready to wind down. Is there any question I haven't asked, or actually with the music, any lasting thoughts you want to leave our listeners?
Yeah, I would just say, for the women out there, take a look at the things that you really want to do, those bold things, those things that may be kind of that secret inside your soul, and start exploring those and unpacking those things, because the only thing that stands away from you and achieving that is getting that out of the way, the narrative that you're telling yourself about yourself that you can't do it.
Well, I also will say go to evokegreatness.com to learn more, or if you want to contact Sonnie to inquire about her services and how she might be able to help you. Sonnie Linebarger, thank you for joining me today. Make it a great day. Have a great weekend. We will be back next Friday.
There's no place like home. You've been listening to Bob Roth's Health Futures. If you have questions about your own or your loved one's future health care, call Cypress Home Care Solutions at 602-264-8009. That's 602-264-8009. Or visit cypresshomecare.com. Be sure to join Health Futures with Bob Roth every Friday at noon, right here on Money Radio 1510 and 105.3 FM.